You are in the middle of a conversation and you are not fully there. Not because you're distracted, not because you do not care, but because some part of you is standing slightly outside your own body, watching, monitoring the tone of your voice, measuring the expression on your face, calculating whether what you just said landed the way you meant it to, wondering if you smiled too much or not enough, wondering if they noticed that pause before you answered, wondering what that pause revealed about you that you did not intend to show. And while all of that is happening, while that quiet internal observer is cataloging every micro detail of your own behavior, you're also supposed to be present, supposed to be listening, supposed to be simply existing inside the moment like everyone else in the room appears to be doing so effortlessly. But you have never quite been able to do that. To simply exist without watching yourself exist. This is the hidden pain of extreme self-awareness, not the kind of self-awareness that is celebrated in personal development articles and therapy offices, not the gentle, grounding practice of checking in with yourself occasionally, but the relentless, exhausting, involuntary kind, the kind that never turns off, the kind that has you replaying a conversation 3 days after it happened, not because something went wrong, but because something you said at minute 7 had a tone you cannot stop dissecting. The kind that makes you feel like a stranger watching your own life through a window, close enough to see everything, just far enough away to never fully feel it. Today we are going inside the psychology of extreme self-awareness, because while the world treats self-knowledge as an uncomplicated virtue, no one talks about what it actually costs to know yourself this well. No one talks about the loneliness of it, the exhaustion of it, the particular kind of suffering that comes not from not understanding yourself, but from understanding yourself almost too completely to bear. Let's begin with what is actually happening inside the mind of someone who is extremely self-aware. Psychologists call it metacognition, the ability to think about your own thinking, to observe your own mental processes as they are happening, to analyze your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors from a kind of internal bird's eye view. Most people engage in metacognition occasionally. Extremely self-aware people live inside it almost constantly. There's a second layer to this called hyper-introspection. It is what happens when metacognition becomes not a useful tool you pick up and put down, but a permanent state of being, a running internal commentary that annotates your own experience in real time. You do not just feel an emotion. You simultaneously feel it, name it, trace its origin, identify the childhood wound it connects to, recognize the pattern it belongs to, and critique yourself for still being affected by it. All before the emotion has even finished moving through your body. And here is where the gift becomes the burden, because the same mind that can see itself so clearly can also never let itself simply be. Think about what it feels like to know exactly why you are upset and still be completely unable to stop being upset. You can trace the feeling all the way back to its source. You can name the attachment wound it connects to. You can identify the trigger with clinical precision. And yet the feeling persists, unchanged, unmoved by your understanding of it. Because insight and healing are not the same thing. Knowing why you hurt does not automatically stop the hurting. And for someone with extreme self-awareness, that gap between understanding and relief can feel like one of the most maddening places in the world to live. You might find yourself watching yourself laughing and wondering if it looks genuine, catching yourself mid-sentence and editing what you were about to say into something safer, more measured, more considered, leaving a social situation and immediately running a full internal debrief. What you said, what you should have said, what your tone implied, what their reaction suggested, what all of it means about who you are and how you came across. You're never fully in the room. Part of you is always in the debrief. This is not overthinking in the casual sense people use when they tell you to stop worrying so much. This is a deeply ingrained orientation of the self, a way of moving through the world that was not chosen consciously, but developed over time as a response to something that once required this level of self-monitoring to navigate safely. Because extreme self-awareness does not emerge randomly. Like most psychological patterns that feel like personality but function like armor, it has an origin. and that origin almost always lives in childhood. Think about the environments that require a child to develop this kind of hyper-awareness of themselves. Homes where love was conditional on behavior, where the child had to constantly monitor and manage how they were coming across in order to remain safe, remain loved, remain acceptable. Homes where a parent's reactions were unpredictable, where the child learned to study themselves through the parent's eyes first, before the parent could find fault, so they could correct it preemptively. Homes where the child was frequently criticized, analyzed, or judged, where every emotion, every reaction, every expression of self was subject to commentary and evaluation. In environments like these, self-awareness is not a philosophical practice. It is a survival tool. The child who is constantly watching themselves is the child who learned that being caught off guard, saying the wrong thing, showing the wrong feeling, being too much or not enough in some way they had not anticipated, had consequences. So they developed an internal surveillance system, a permanent observer stationed inside their own mind whose job was to see themselves before anyone else could, to catch the flaw before it was noticed, to edit the self before it could be rejected. And that system worked. It kept them safe. It made them perceptive, careful, emotionally intelligent beyond their years. The world praised them for it, called them mature, insightful, self-aware. What the world did not see was the cost. What it cost to never be able to switch the observer off. What it cost to live your entire life being watched, even when the watcher is yourself. As you grow older, the symptoms of this pattern deepen and expand. You might experience what psychologists call analysis paralysis, the inability to make decisions because you're so aware of every possible angle, every potential consequence. Every way a choice might reveal something unflattering about your motivations, that you become frozen. Not because you lack intelligence, but because you have too much of it applied to too small a moment. You might struggle to be present in relationships because intimacy requires a certain surrender of self-consciousness that feels almost physically impossible to you. You cannot simply be with someone. You're always simultaneously being with them and watching yourself be with them and evaluating how that being is going and wondering what it says about you and whether they are seeing what you are seeing and whether what they are seeing is acceptable. You might feel a peculiar loneliness that is hard to explain to people who do not share this experience, because you're not lonely in the way of someone who lacks connection. You are lonely in the way of someone who can never fully arrive inside their own life, who is always slightly outside it, observing, who understands themselves so well that they sometimes feel like the only person in the world who truly knows how contradictory, how complicated, how exhaustingly layered they actually are. You might also feel a quiet shame that accompanies all this self-knowledge, because when you can see yourself this clearly, you see everything. Not just the strengths and the insights and the emotional intelligence, but the pettiness, the irrational fears, the moments of selfishness you cannot explain away, the patterns you understand perfectly and repeat anyway, the gap between who you know you want to be and who you observe yourself being in your less flattering moments. And that gap, seen so clearly and so consistently, can feel devastating. There is a difference that psychologists draw between reflection and rumination. Reflection is the healthy use of self-awareness, looking back at an experience with curiosity in order to understand it and grow from it. Rumination is what happens when that looking turns into looping. When you are not examining an experience to understand it but replaying it compulsively, not to find an answer, but because the mind cannot seem to release the question. Highly self-aware people are at significant risk of falling into rumination because the same machinery that makes them so perceptive, the constant internal monitoring, the pattern recognition, the deep processing, can turn inward and begin feeding on itself when there is nothing external left to analyze. You begin analyzing yourself, and that is a very lonely and exhausting place to live. But here is what changes something when you finally understand it. The self-awareness was never the problem. The self-persecution hiding inside it was, because somewhere along the way, the internal observer who was built to protect you became something closer to an internal critic. The system designed to help you avoid rejection began to preemptively reject yourself, picking out every flaw, cataloging every failure, maintaining a running commentary of everything that needs to be fixed, managed, improved, or hidden before the outside world can see it. You were never meant to be your own harshest judge. The observer was built for safety, not for sentencing. Healing for someone with extreme self-awareness does not look like becoming less aware. You cannot and would not want to dismantle the very thing that makes you perceptive, empathetic, and emotionally intelligent. What healing looks like is learning to change the relationship between you and the observer, learning to notice the internal commentary without being governed by it, learning to watch your own thoughts with curiosity rather than judgment, learning to say, I see that I am doing this, and I'm choosing not to make it mean something devastating about who I am. It looks like practicing the radical act of being in the room without simultaneously conducting a debrief of being in the room, just for a minute, just long enough to feel what it is like to laugh without wondering if the laugh looked real, to speak without editing every sentence before it leaves your mouth, to feel an emotion without immediately filing it under the correct psychological category and tracing it back to its origin point. It looks like learning the difference between self-knowledge and self-surveillance, between understanding yourself as an act of compassion and monitoring yourself as an act of control, between being deeply acquainted with who you are and being imprisoned by that acquaintance, because you were never meant to live like this. You were never meant to be the permanent watcher of your own experience. The observer was built to serve you. Somewhere along the way, you began to serve it instead. And the liberation is not in seeing less clearly. It is in finally using all that extraordinary clarity to see something you may have missed until now. That you are allowed to exist without justifying the existence. That your thoughts do not all require analysis. That your feelings do not all require explanation. That you are not a problem to be solved, a pattern to be decoded, or a self to be endlessly optimized. You are a person. Complicated and contradictory and layered, yes, but allowed to simply be those things without the constant running commentary. Allowed to be imperfect in real time without the internal tribunal convening to evaluate what the imperfection reveals. Allowed to be in your life, fully, messily, presently inside it, without standing just outside it watching. You have spent so long seeing yourself. Perhaps it is finally time to simply be yourself. Not perfectly. Not with full understanding of every layer and every pattern and every wound that contributed to this moment. Just here, just present, just allowed. That is not the end of self-awareness. That is where it finally becomes a gift.